Greetings and welcome back to Room 303, AP English, the Roberts Lectures. We are in the poetry section, and we turn now to Eugenio Montale's Buffalo on page 770. Buffalo, published in 1929 in Italian and translated by Robert Zweig. Zweig being one of our two editors of our Roberts edition here. Montale is an important poet, Italian poet. We've already worked with his English horn on page 693. His dates 1896 to 1981. He did win the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1975. One of the truly gifted poets, and has a tremendous eye for saying something without actually saying it. We're going to see that in this poem. It's a brilliant poem for that reason. Also, he loves to make allusions or references that are never actually said out loud. For example, you can't really read this poem, Buffalo, unless you have two pieces of crucial information. One of those is provided for us at the bottom of page 770 in the footnote. The Velodrome Buffalo, a Parisian cycling racetrack. I don't know if you've ever seen this, you can Google this, but they have these tracks that kind of go up, and then men and women will ride on their bicycles in really fast ways. And it was a hugely popular form of entertainment and racing, obviously, and of course still in the Olympics, right? The Velodrome Buffalo, a Parisian cycling racetrack, was the site of many world cycling records from 1893 into World War I, when it was replaced by an airplane factory. The Buffalo was named after, you're going to love this coming from Wyoming, Buffalo Bill Cody, whose Wild West show was performed there during the first year of its existence. Of course, as you know, Bill Cody had those shows that went all over the world, and one of the places that they went, of course, was to Paris. All right? So you got to know that. Those of you who would be looking to read this poem going, where's the buffalo, you're going to be lost, okay? Number two, you have to know, appreciating that Montale is Italian, you have to know your Dante. And of course, we smile because we know our Dante. We spent a lot of time with Dante's Divine Comedy. We have full lectures on all of Divine Comedy at learnstrong.net. But you'll remember that in Inferno, there's a very graphic picture of what it's like to be in hell. Those words, abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Now, obviously, some of our comments about the ways in which T.S. Eliot will draw heavily from Dante will help us in our reading here as well. Let's go ahead now and read the poem, and then we'll spend a few minutes trying to figure out really what Montale is saying, even though he doesn't say it. It's quite genius. Buffalo. Gusting. A sweet inferno channeled crowds of every color in the loop of blaring megaphones. The buses gushed out into the evening. On the churning gulf, heat evaporated into smoke. Down below, a shining arc etched a current, and the cloud was ready at the passage. A black man slumbered inside a ray of light that cut the darkness in a box. Loose, easy women awaited the ferry's landing. I said to myself, Buffalo. And the name worked. I fell into the limbo of the deafening voices of the blood, where flashes burned the sight like flickers of mirror. I heard the dry crashes, and all around me saw the curved, stripped backs whirling on the track. Now, of course, the genius of this poem is that two things are happening simultaneously. We have a literal reading of this poem. We have an allegorical, figurative, metaphoric reading of this poem. The literal reading. Well, of course, he is watching at a track that got named Buffalo because of Bill Cody bringing his show there at the very beginning of this circular kind of theater. So he's watching a bike race, right? And all the people that are a part of it. Obviously, when you have racing, you have gambling. When you have gambling, you have a certain kind of seedy element. He calls them the loose, easy women, right? So in other words, he's sitting watching this race. Guys on bikes who are riding in circles around the track. But of course, there's a second reading, and because we know our Dante, we're all together familiar with how Dante the Pilgrim when he comes into one of those earlier circles of hell, that he, Inferno, that he will in fact see those who are the passionate being driven in a whirlwind. Allegorically speaking, this is what passion does. And at that moment, we recognize that Inferno gets used in the first line, that Limbo gets used in the 15th line, and of course Montale is dropping enough hints for us to recognize there's another reading of this poem. Brilliant, brilliant reading of this poem in terms of the allegorical. A representation of what life is really like. It is this, well, obviously we've used this term from our study of Yeats, the gyre. It's the spinning, right? The turning and turning in the widening gyre, the opening lines of Yeats' Second Coming, right? Let's go through it now, stanza by stanza, and just work through it. We begin with the word gusting. A sweet inferno. Notice, normally we don't think of inferno as sweet. Sweet, one letter away from sweat, which is, of course, where we'll be at the very end of the poem. Right? Channeled crowds of every color in the loop of blaring megaphones. And the minute we think of loop, we think of circles. And the minute we think of circles, we think of Dante. The buses gushed, it's an interesting verb, out into the evening. In other words, they're in the same way that you're being ferried across in Dante, the buses bring everyone to the Buffalo, to this racing rink. On the churning gulf, from gusting we go to churning, heat evaporated into smoke, very Dante-esque. Down below, a shining arc etched a current, and the crowd was ready at the passage. Pure Dante. I mean, it's literally like reading something out of our Pinsky translation of Dante's Inferno as we've worked with it. We then will have a reference to a black man slumbering inside of a ray of light. This is easy for us to make our analogies with Dante as well. That cut the darkness. In a box, loose, easy women awaited the ferry's landing. And of course your footnote, or your question number 3 down below, will immediately make the directions to Dante's Inferno. And of course the ferrying across the river and all of that. And then there's that moment of the pronoun I. I said to myself, which is very Dante-esque, right? As we said in our lectures on Dante's Divine Comedy, so much of that poem is musings by Dante the Pilgrim to himself. I said to myself. And immediately we think, of course, of T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets, especially East Coker, and that third and that important third passage of East Coker, when he says, I said to myself, be still, and let the darkness come upon you, which shall be the darkness of God. And then later, I said to myself, be still, and wait without hope, for hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing, right? That notion, wait without thought, you are not ready for thought. All of that is going to factor, I think, heavily in Montale's work here as well, right? In our reading of this word. I said to myself, Buffalo, exclamation point, and the name worked. Now, of course, that's the heart of the poem, so we have to ask, why does the name work? Like, why? Buffalo. Well, of course, we can think about the fact that what Bill Cody was doing, right, was a show, demonstration, some kind of entertainment, drama, we might say, yes? And a test on top of it as well, no question. The word buffalo works perfectly in almost every way, he says. The name worked. And then the fall. I fell into the limbo. And of course, we know that limbo is one of those early stages of Dante's Inferno. The deafening voices of the blood, where flashes burn the sight. We know that burning and blood are central motifs for Dante's Inferno. The sight, and then an interesting simile, like flickers of mirror, which is a very Dante-esque kind of rendering as well. I heard the dry crashes. Of course, when you have bike races, you often will have crashes, just as in NASCAR, right? And all around me saw the curved, stripped backs whirling on the track. And of course, the word whirling will take us back to the opening, gusting of this poem. brilliantly constructed little poem. Well, what is it that he's saying? Well, let's look at 2a really quickly. Life is obviously a drama or a show. Life is a journey. Life is a test. Shall we say it? Life is a race. At 2b, well, the allusions in the extended metaphors here are brilliant. Obviously, we are rewriting Dante's Inferno. This is one of the reasons I love a poem like this, because it reminds us you can take a classic work like Dante's Inferno and you can make it modern again. A great poet has the ability to do that. Finally, at 3a, I mean, there's just so many ways to think about how we can relate to this. Obviously, Dante's Divine Comedy comes to mind. Shakespeare's The World is a Stage. How about Sir Walter Raleigh's? You remember that little poem we love in 303? What is our life? A play of passion. Our mirth, the music of division. Our mother's wombs, the tiring houses be, the dressing houses, where we're dressed for this short comedy. That is to say, when we're carried in our mother's tummy, it's like being in a waiting room before we go out onto the stage. Finally, in 3b, reading a poem like this after you've done your Dante study is fun. To what degree do you think of your life as a drama, as a show? Some of you smiling because, of course, high school is all about drama, drama, drama. I got news for you, it doesn't ever seem to change. As you move on to university, it'll be the same, and then on into your careers, it'll be the same. To what degree do you think of your life as a journey? We think immediately of our Homer, don't we, and our Virgil when we think about that, and obviously our Dante. To what degree is your life a test? Or, to borrow from this poem, a race? And to what degree is there crashing, is there whirling, is there gusting? Remarkable little poem, yes? I hope it'll lead you to more study of Montale.